we shouldn't give them a penny. We should say how sorry we are that they failed to understand that in 1995, the government of the day said that in 15 years' time, after 15 years, we're going to equalise pensions entirely appropriately. And in 2010, 15 years later, along came Cameron and he said, we're doing it. The fact is that these women failed to follow this, right, is their responsibility, as with things like, you know, versions of the capital gains tax being changed through the Chancellor's statement just now. And so I wouldn't pay them a penny. They're not entitled to it, in my view. The fact that they didn't use their eyes and their ears to protect their own future is an issue for them. And thank you and good night. And if
blimey, I can hear them. I can hear them, Kelvin. I can hear you from here. I bet people will be furious because I'm telling you now, I don't know how you spend your spare time, but many people will not be spending their spare time just randomly, casually listening out for pension announcements that may or may not affect them in a decade's plus time. Many women, only, like I've got an example of one here. She got her letter about her pension 2 years before she was expecting to retire. So many people, some people, women, by the way, say that they never got any comms at all. And I mean, this report, this Ombudsman report, even validated that. It said that the communications were lacking, to put it mildly. Tom?
Well, it's back to business as usual on this panel because I could not disagree with Kelvin more on that point. I mean, look, let's be clear here. There's two communication points. Kelvin's quite right. The 1995 Act, which did signal that between 2010 and 2020, this equality law essentially would come in where we'd equalise pensions for men and for women at 65. There are 3 million WASPI women affected. But what's important today, and I know it's not a legally binding judgment by the Ombudsman, but it's an important, and why it took them 5 years, heaven knows. But the point is, there's been an injustice here. DWP, Department for Work and Pensions, you're really digging in on this. And actually, whilst I agree with Kelvin up to a point that we can't afford 30-odd billion pounds in terms of the backdated payments, but I do think we can pay somewhere between the £1,000 and £3,000 compensation that the Ombudsman is actually suggesting, which would be a fraction, really, of the price. And as
my bet, by the way, Tom, is that a lot of the women are simply making it up. It's actually a good thing. It's, you know, like those compensation schemes where a lawyer writes to you and saying, "Have you ever had a Mercedes?" Say that you had no idea that the fuel worked in that way. So let's be clear. I am not in favour, and nor is the public purse in favour. We have some massive scandals coming down the track. We do. We've got billions going out the door with the post office, right? That's a taxpayer thing. We have the scandal of the blood, the tainted blood. Now, that is a 20 to 30 billion pound. We are, as far as I know, under Labour, under Tory, under Lib Dem, we are completely skinned. I'm afraid we've got to say to these ladies, I'm very sorry, you have our apology for it, but we haven't got the money, and nor do we believe that all of you are at it, are suffering, and that the DWP, unusually, for somebody like me, I'm 100% behind them on this particular case.
WASPI ladies, what do you make to what you've just had to hear from Kelvin? But Tom, go on.
We either respect the rule of law in this country or not. We either set up the ombudsman. It's not legally binding. No. But the point is, an ombudsman, who's effectively an umpire, a referee, has agreed that the Department for Work and Pensions engaged in maladministration. And actually, it goes back to George Osborne's austerity years. I mean, I read a case from one of the WASPI women today who got a letter in March 2013 that her pension was changed for another 5 years to March 2020 when she'd made her own personal retirement plans for the following year.
Well, that's what she said. That's what she said.
That's a reasonable thing to do.
That's what she said.
Well,
what are you going to do?
I mean, if I thought I was going to get 10 grand by just agreeing that I was totally... Look, if somebody is coming up to retirement, they are paying a lot of interest in on what their payment is going to be, and what percentage of them are relying totally. Have you noticed how many have all come out saying we were relying on, what was the pension be at that time? Say 6,000 a year. Is that sure. if they were relying on £6,000 a year to get through life in the mid 2000s, then they have a massive problem.
Would you support
and it's not a problem
testing?
I'm going to fund.
Would you support means testing the compensation? So you have to put your case as to how you were financially.
No, I'm not.
missed out.
They're not going to get. For me, they're not getting one penny, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's not how the tax system works. They don't come to you, Kelvin, and go, right, you know, you've paid your PAYE or your dividends or whatever it is. Please, sir, how do you mind if I spend it on this?
I totally agree with that, and it's down to Parliament, and that's why I'm saying to Parliament, we haven't got the money. I don't believe some of the women who are all not unreasonably saying, I wouldn't mind 10 grand. In fact, I wouldn't mind 3 grand, pay for a nice holiday, right? But I'm saying to Parliament, they should not bow at the knee to this. Otherwise, God knows how many other compensation claims are going to be heading our way.
What are you going to do? Strap them onto a lie detector test?
Not a bad idea, actually. Most of them will fail.
I'm going to shut up.
Most of them will fail.
I can't believe I'm giving the guy ideas. Pam used to say, I really used to like Kelvin, but now I think he is an absolute bleep. I'll tell you what the bleep is in the Brit, but I'm not going to ruin people's tea times by saying that. Linda says, I can tell you, I don't think that the government will compensate these WASPI women. She goes on to say, a lot of pensioners, by the way, still pay income tax. Yes, they do. So a lot of these people potentially will still be taxpayers. Philip says, I've got to say, it is a lot of men saying that they don't support this. Philip says, I was born in 1952 and I was treated very fairly. They weren't paying attention. Yes, but Philip, my love, you're not a woman. I don't think that you will have had your state pension age change so quickly with perhaps so little notice. Kath says, WASPI women absolutely deserve some recompense for the diabolical changes that were made in such an untimely fashion. She says, yes, of course, changes need to be made, but the way it was done was absolutely appalling. They don't like you very much, Kelvin.
No, well, I'm pleased.
I'm putting that mildly.
I'm pleased about that because the truth about the matter is they will have known when they were going to retire. They had 15 years at the minimum to get this right. Why on earth weren't they concentrating on their future in a positive way? And I'm afraid that they should have kept their ears and their eyes open, and none of this would have happened.
What about things like, I don't know, people that got divorced and they had their settlements calculated on a particular retirement age, and then all of a sudden found out that they're going to have to work, I don't know, half a decade longer or whatever else it is? What about people like that?
Well, normally divorces are matters of great joy for one partner,
he's a pensioner, can't you? Really, he's coming out with all the lines tonight.
Well, I can tell. I mean, I do have to say there are divided opinions. To be fair to you, Kelvin, there are a lot of people that are actually saying the same thing. William says, "Take some responsibility, women."
Yep.
I've got to say, it's mainly men that have that sentiment. How would you feel? I'll throw it back on you. All these men that get in touch, Kelvin, and people like that saying it's the women's fault. How would you feel if you're, I don't know, you're planning your retirement at whatever age? Don't forget there was talk recently on some report that the retirement age could even go as high as 71. Would you be up for that? Would you think it would be cool? And if you missed it for whatever reason, you weren't communicated properly, would you suck it up and say, you know what, maybe it's on me? I bet you wouldn't. Get in touch and tell me, though, your thoughts. GBviews@gbnews.com.